What's up, y'all? Welcome to the Undrunken Podcast. I'm your host, Courtney, and I want you to join me as I talk with real people and have super gritty conversations about their journeys to becoming undrunken. So let's go. Dump the drink because it's time to get this party started. What's up, y'all? We are back this week with Jen from last week, and I'm so excited. So Jen is the second guest who reached out right after their interview with some I shouldas. But she's the first to make it back, and my other guest and friend and I were talking, and I think they're going to do their part two soon. Just like Jen, they texted me almost immediately after our interview, and after having this experience with Jen, I'm really going to encourage them more to do their second round. I just love this whole concept and really the courage it takes to reflect and own it when you feel like you don't show up authentically or 100% the way you want. So I'm curious, which guest would you want to hear from again? And what would you ask them? You know, hit me up and let me know, because I definitely like the interactiveness of you all being part of this. So let's talk about Jen. So after her interview, she reached out later in the day and apologized. She felt she wasn't 100% present and was really disappointed in herself for the rest of the evening. I thought she showed up great, and she said she just wasn't her most authentic self. Everything was true, but she focused so much on the facts she didn't convey her emotions. Y'all, this was so inspiring. I realized right then I didn't encourage this enough in interviews, asking about how does it make you feel? How did a situation or a comment make you feel? So it's forever changed every conversation and interview I have done since. I can't wait to jump into her part two. Like I said, I admire her and her bravery to put herself out there more fully, and I hope you love it. Before we jump in, I've been reading some new books and discovered some new podcasts that have been incredibly impactful. We live in a world that tells us to hide any part of us that doesn't fit the social norm, and I have an idea that all of us here at Drunken are not only fighting this, we are changing the idea in the world that people who don't drink alcohol are boring or uncool just because we don't fit the social norm. And I love how we all accept each other for who we are, and how we all accept even those who continue to consume for who they are. And I'm really grateful for Jamie Kern-Lima and her book Worthy. She talks about this, and I'm so grateful for my amazing niece for sharing the experience of reading this book together. It really is a joy of mine to share books with people I adore and be able to talk about them and the ideas and the concepts. You know, I don't think of myself as someone who is in recovery, and Jen talked about this in her episode, because it wasn't something I felt like I had to recover from. Dumping the drink was, especially as I've learned talking to people, relatively easy for me. However, while I don't think of myself as someone in recovery, I know my relationship with alcohol and dumping the drink has definitely changed my life and who I am and who I continue to be. And accepting that for myself, accepting myself. Y'all, I'm going to get real personal. 4 years, maybe 10 or more years, I've done a life wheel exercise with my BFF, Andrea. And this is actually where the quickfire on the Wheel of Life came from. And this exercise is something we've done so consistently year over year. And the results are amazing, because what you really do find coming back together year over year is not only are we holding ourselves accountable, but we're also seeing the manifestations and the results of our efforts and our goals. And, well, I didn't do it this year. Partially, actually, a lot, if not all of it, really had to do with going to Peru in November, which is typically the month that we do this. And that was such a life-altering experience. But, I got to thinking more, and it really has been like this whole past year. And, I was reflecting over the weekend, because a year ago, March 10th, actually, I went to a mystical ceremony, a psilocybin ceremony. And I wasn't participating in the ceremony. I was actually assisting the facilitator who was doing this amazing pre-work and just ensuring that she was set up for success. And so instead of going into the actual ceremony, I was tending fire. And I was seeing so much work being done by the people in the temple. And I know this is going to sound woo-woo to some of you all. And that's okay, because it was an experience I had. And I don't even know that words are going to do it justice. But tending the fire outside of the temple during this mystical ceremony, I got to see and hear and feel the work being done in the temple. I literally was seeing the energy of the people in the fire. And this wasn't because I was under the influence. It was truly this energetic thing. And even during what we call the laughing meditation, where everyone in the temple started laughing, you could see the fire responding and dancing, and it was just so cool. So for myself personally, I had a lot of thoughts and realizations that weekend observing other people doing their work, and it just manifested an awakening in me. And within a couple of weeks, I dumped the drink for good. I look at my life now, like a year later, and wow, like everything is different. I know I've talked about this a few times. Who I am feels different. And I found myself really struggling when I sat down to look at my life wheel, or anytime I even thought about working on it. And where this is where this is most true, or where it feels the heaviest, is in my work spoke in the wheel of life. I'm very, very much aware there are ways I'm getting in my own way and feeling blocked. So I decided to be brave about this, and I reached out to Katie Saltzman, who hosts the Crying Burns Calories podcast and is an amazing business coach and health expert for women on the rise. And she was also a guest, and I'll link to her episode. And I just felt called to her amazing coaching. And so I reached out to her. I think I was even crying, and I said, "Hey, I need help. I'm really struggling." And she responded, and she asked me a question that I couldn't answer. We got to start with, what is it that I want? And it hit me hard, and I realized that's why I haven't done my wheel of life. Because what I want, has shifted in such big, powerful ways. It almost feels like starting over, but with like a bunch of knowledge. Like, sometimes I ask my guests, if you could talk to younger you, what would you say? And well, I'm not younger, certainly. I'm older and wiser and in a better place. But it kind of feels like that's where I'm at. Like these feelings of, what do I want in my future? What kind of life do I want to create? But I have this like secret knowledge I've discovered. And synchronistically, as it happens in this beautiful life of serendipity, Katie had an episode, and it felt like she was talking to me. She starts out talking about protecting your peace and removing toxicity from your life. Y'all, what? Oh my gosh, such a huge concept for me. Katie's episode also talked about age and health and exercising and movement, and how if you don't like the way you're feeling, what is it you're doing in regards to our habits, and how our habits line up with the person we say we want to be. And it was just what I needed to hear this week. I'll link to it in show notes, so check it out. And if it resonates with y'all, hit me up. I'd love to chat with you about it. I mentioned my niece, who I just want to share. She's such an inspiration and joy in my life. She introduced me to the Empower Her podcast, which introduced me to Katie Saltzman, which got me to start this podcast. And my niece brings so much joy to my heart and inspiration to my life. Most recently, she introduced me to the Mindset Mentor podcast, which is literally blowing my mind. And this last episode I just listened to it's very tactical, and I like that because it feels attainable. And this episode specifically hit on something that I've really been figuring out about myself: consistency. He was talking about it really comes down to making a ritual out of something, and then it becomes routine and habit. And I love that. Routines and habits, not my jam, but rituals, totally my jam. For instance, if I were to say I'm going to work out every day, I'm not going to do it. But if I create a ritual around it, I'm excited. I'm going to do this. And before I do that, I get to do this and get ready. And it becomes more enjoyable for me. And I think creating rituals helps me give what I'm doing the focus it deserves. I love how he ends his episodes too. Make it your mission to make somebody else's day better. Boom, like mic drop, right? Anyway, so he's talking about consistency, which has become a huge part of my life this past year. Certainly with the podcast, consistently showing up week over week, except this week. Y'all, I'm sorry. It is Friday when I'm posting this. I totally had it in my brain all day yesterday that I had another day to finish editing and posting this week's episode. Even though I knew it was Thursday, things that only happen on Thursdays were happening. Literally 11 o'clock at night, I went, oh shit. Oh, sorry. I'm trying to not cuss. I'll talk more about that next week. Anyway, oops. So without further ado, I give you Jen part 2.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. You seem like you're in higher spirits than last time we chatted.
Okay, so my son is autistic, and we had just had a meeting setting up his education plan. I don't know how familiar you are with
Like
all
an
of that.
OT or something?
It was his IEP, which is
That's the one.
the accommodations that he needs to be successful. And they were having some issues, and he has a brand new case manager. It's her first year, and she was just constantly emailing me. And the very last email that I got the morning that we were supposed to do our podcast, I felt kind of threatened. Like,
Ooh,
yeah. And
what?
I don't think she intended to come off that way,
Oh,
but she's really young, and this is her first year, and I kind of lost it. And they wanted to have a meeting, but I didn't feel like they had given him enough time to kind of adjust to what they wanted him to do. And so I didn't want to have a meeting, so they ended up calling me with the assistant principal on the phone, and he
geez.
was in the room. And it went okay, but I was just like, I was in no shape. Like, I
The
hadn't
nerves were
slept.
shot.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
was really because we moved here 4 years ago from Florida. I grew up here, but
Okay.
I moved to Florida in 2001 and met my husband like a year later. And so we were living in Florida, and we moved here in 2019. My son was being treated so horribly
Mm,
by the school district and the administration at his school that there was just so much trauma. So
yeah.
anytime something isn't going right and I'm feeling resistance, there's like a little bit of PTSD that kicks in.
Yep.
So that's what happened that day. And also I feel like you have all these great people on your show, and they have so much to contribute. And I was really pressuring myself, like, what am I going to say that's going to have any kind of impact? And I couldn't come up with anything really. And I think because we hadn't talked or anything before that, I was like throwing all these facts at you, and like I was like, oh, that sucked. That was just terrible. So I've been trying to think a lot more
Mhm.
about, like, why did I want to do this to begin with? What about it is going to be impactful? So,
And
well, I feel like I was not telling any untruths in my story, but I was just giving you the facts. So while yes, it's true that I'm wired this way, I was trying to think what in my life sort of led me to be so like firm about it. Like, I'm not
mhm.
going to do this. And then thinking about that, I thought, how was I treated along the way? Right?
Mm.
Like, how was I treated by the people that I met? That, I mean, everybody that's been on your show has talked in some part about how they've been called boring, or why are they making this choice, what's wrong with them, right? So even though it never led me to change who I was or what I wanted to do or be or whatever, I, it did affect I was depressed sometimes. I was
Mm.
left out. I was lonely,
I,
and
I think the word you used was isolated.
yes, very much so.
That kind of grabbed me.
Yeah, isolated, very, very much so.
Yeah.
So,
Why do you think that is?
well, I've been thinking about it. I've been trying to think about it. When I was young, um, I just, I had never really been around anybody who was drunk. My parents drank socially. I can't think of a time when I ever saw anyone drunk. I was a kid of the 80s. So there was a lot of that Nancy Reagan Say No to Drugs, the very special afternoon show on ABC, the very special episode of Growing Pains, or, the afternoon special after the cartoons that were always kind of preachy. And so I think a lot of that sunk into my head. My dad, I was a rule follower according to my dad, and he's right. I still am. That's just who I am. And because I wasn't really quiet about it. So,
Right.
I think people were put off by that. Like, oh, she's a goody two shoes. She's this, she's that, and I think people were put off by that. And I think that I chose people who weren't like that. And so it immediately, like, especially when you're a teenager and you're a young adult, shrinks your group of friends.
There's part of me, why is being a goody two shoes such a bad thing anyway?
It's done well for me, but that it's
Yeah. But that goes along with why do we, even those of us who choose to not drink, we still have this association with drinking as cool?
right. I didn't want to do it. I mean, I was thinking, was this something that I set out to say, I'm never going to be drunk in my life? And I can't really think in the beginning of a time where my mindset was like that. But I knew when I was younger, it's not legal. You see all these, all those after school specials.
Right.
The kid who was drunk was the bad kid, right?
Yeah.
Like you never saw back then. It's so much different now. You never saw, was there trauma in their life, or, or anything like that. It was just a bad kid. And so I didn't want to be the bad kid, right? Like I was the people pleaser, and I didn't want to be the bad kid. Like I did not want to upset my parents. Like that's not what I was. So, that was kind of how it started. And then when I was in my early 20s, I had some friends who were younger, so I didn't really go out a lot. But when I turned 21, 22, because my friends were a little younger, I became the designated driver. And the twist on this is that my friend offered my car and my driving services to everybody because she knew I wasn't going to drink. So she invited all her cool friends to ride in my car. And one time she's like, oh, well, these two friends we knew from work, we worked at the same place. I invited such and such and such and such. So we're going to pick them up and we're going to take them to ladies' night. We loved to go to Black Angus and go to ladies' night. And I just really wanted the potato soup, but I liked to dance. So I would go. Well, we get to this person's house, and I naively, because of my inexperience with alcohol, just assumed everybody was going to be there, right? No, because then they can't drive home, right? Like if they all go back to this person's house, they can't drive home to their houses. So I became the chauffeur, going around and picking all these people up and taking them to the restaurant. And because it was not a club, it was a restaurant with a dance floor. And then these people were not people that I was friends with. They were people that I worked with, but they didn't talk to me at work. So I became like the taxi cab driver.
And how did that feel?
That happened one time. Exactly one time, because I said, oh, it was somebody's birthday, can you do this for her because it's her birthday and she can't afford a cab, she wants to buy alcohol. I did it. After that time I said, do not allow, do not tell people that I'm going to take them anywhere again. It's not your car. It's not, that's not cool. But I didn't feel like a friend or included. I felt like, oh, we got this driver now, she's, so that was another isolating thing for me. And then of
How
course,
did they treat you when you were out?
They didn't really talk to me. They went and got their drinks at the bar and went out and danced and talked to other people. And I just kind of, I mean, I would occasionally have like some fruity drink that I didn't even know what it was, that somebody would be like, oh, hey, you should try this. So I'd order that. And I didn't like it. So it wasn't something that I kept doing. I usually just drank Coke, honestly,
Yeah.
or water. But yeah, they didn't really talk to me there, but when it was time to go, then they got in the car and I took them home. And I said I appreciate that they don't want to drink and drive, because I don't want anybody to drink and drive, but that's not cool, right? Like, if you're my friends, but I didn't have friends who did that. See, that's the thing. Like, around me, my friends did not do that. I had a couple different friend groups that didn't really interact very much. And one of my friends, the one who invited everyone, would go out with other people and get drunk. And another isolating incident was at this same job. There was another group of people that used to go camping at Chelan.
Mm.
And I was friends with some of them, but this is supposed to be my best friend. She always went, but she never invited me. And so the other people in the group would come up, well, hey, are you going camping with us this weekend? I wasn't invited. And they would just go and I would hear later they spent the whole weekend drunk or whatever. So I was always very much like on the outside of those groups.
What a tough thing too, because it's like you want to be included, but also like, would you really enjoy your time?
No.
Right.
Yeah, and that's where I was. Like, I don't want to be in that mess being the only sober person, and I'm certainly not gonna change who I am to be with these people.
Right.
But what do I do?
Mm.
So that's what I didn't share with you before, that I think would be a little bit more impactful than just the facts of, not being wired that way, which I'm not. But
I'm just looking at my notes. So I know you made notes and you didn't bring them last time, but I took notes from our conversations.
Okay.
And have them, because I want you to know I really appreciated you reaching out. And I think that it was valuable for me, for your story, but I also really wanted to tell you that I admired you owning that for yourself.
Thank you.
Like, you said some pretty impactful things. I'd love to hear, I mean, I love that you were willing to dive into the whole isolation and the loneliness factor, because I definitely think that you're right. I think people can relate to that, right?
Okay.
You do stop getting invited. If you quit drinking later in life, you stop getting invited. And numerous people.
It's going to happen at some point either way.
Yeah. Because drinking is a pretty social thing.
Yeah.
Right. And a center to a lot of activities. You mentioned that when things get crazy at work, you're often told you need a drink, but that you have other ways to cope with stress. And I would love to hear.
Okay.
What are those ways?
I'm not always the best at it, because I have a lot of stresses. I own my husband and I own a business. So we own a commercial marine insurance agency. We're all remote. We all work from home. So you kind of never leave the job, because the office is right there. And I do all of the financial stuff, the billing and paying the insurance companies and all of that sort of thing. So it can get pretty crazy sometimes, like, especially when people aren't paying on time, which right now with the economy, we're having a lot of an issue with that. But I listen to music. Music is like I think I said before, a very, very visceral experience for me. Songs will just make me cry. Just, I don't know. There's some songs I can't ever listen to without crying. And it's not even necessarily a sad song, but and I have I've been trying to. I have an app on my iWatch that does meditation. And it has the different types of breathing that you've talked about before, like the box breathing and stuff like that. And then I'm also doing this another program right now, like personally for me, a weight loss program where they explained all the different types of breathing in there to do if you need a break or something like that. So I think when I remember it, it's very helpful. My husband and I walk a lot in our neighborhood, and we have a lot of hills, so I call it a hike. It's not really a hike in the woods, but yeah, we'll do that together. When I'm really stressed, I've found in the mornings, like if I go down to make coffee or something like that and no one's around, I will put my phone on and put Spotify on and I will dance. And it's just silly, but it helps a lot. It takes you right out of that.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. That's what those are just, and I like to read too, but I don't have nearly as much time to read as I like to. And I also do, silly, but like puzzles instead of actual physical puzzles, I do like puzzles on my phone. Because then you don't have to go buy them and then figure out what to do with them later. I never thought like that, but sometimes I do that, but just different things.
I know, it's always like you get the puzzle put together and then you're like, I don't want to take it apart and put it away.
Right.
Like I like glue it, put it on my wall. Like,
Right,
what am I gonna do with it?
I never thought I would like them on my phone because I didn't think there would be enough of like a physical experience. But you can turn on the sound and you hear that click when the piece goes into place. So it's a little, you're moving your finger. It's still a little bit, but it's not quite the same. But just some things I try to do.
And I love those. Those are tactical things.
And skincare. I like to paint my nails
Mm.
and myself, and I like to do my skincare routine every night. Those are things that I just do that kind of like try to bring me down from.
Yeah. That ritual, that nighttime ritual is so important. Yeah. So there was something else that you mentioned that I really definitely want to talk about. And you mentioned that one of the things you didn't admit when we first talked was how hurt you were when that person tried to get you drunk at your wedding, and that you never confronted them about it.
I never have, no.
Yeah. And that you really haven't dealt with how that affected your relationship with them.
That's all true. Yeah.
Without getting into the specifics of the relationship, I'd love to dig into that a little bit because I think I mentioned this when we talked before. I had a friend who would do that. We'd go out and she would like try and sneak alcohol into my drinks or, somehow get me to drink when it was like a year that I didn't want to drink.
Wow.
And I didn't realize until we talked, like that actually hurt my feelings.
It's a violation in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's, for me, when I got married, I was 30. And so this is like a whole lifetime of intentionally not drinking to excess, intentionally. And at my wedding, that would never be, if I ever decided that I wanted to try doing that, to see what it would be like, which I never have had the desire to do. But if I ever did, it would not be at my wedding. And this person is a family member and does not feel the same way I do about drinking. And I think at the time I didn't know what happened. I just was starting to feel really weird. Like I said, like, that 2-second delay on the award shows where they can beep out. My brain felt like my mouth and my brain were on a 2-second delay, right? Like something just didn't feel right. I was thinking things and I felt like they weren't coming out of my mouth right. So I just stopped. And I found out later that this person was intentionally topping off my wine glass. And it's malicious in my case. And why would you do that knowing how I feel? You don't know how I'm going to react because I don't know how I'm going to react. And why?
You think you said malicious. Was it maybe they weren't married at the time? Or
they were not.
You think that maybe there was some jealousy that was driving that, or
long time probably.
yeah. Were you
Long,
close to them before this happened?
as kids, the relationship was pretty rough. Um, and then I thought things resolved as we got older.
Mhm.
But if that's true, then why did that happen?
Right.
And it makes me question, like, was it really genuine when things were resolved? And there's another layer of like, I moved across the country by myself at 27, and I got married here in Washington because that's where my family is. But that was 3 years after I moved. And so I think part of it was being on the other side of the country from this person. Like, there was a better relationship for a while.
Yeah.
And then coming back, and it wasn't like a big wedding. It wasn't a fancy wedding. We only had about 60 people. We didn't spend a whole lot of money, but I think maybe just the wedding itself. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, like I said, I found out later, and I was super disappointed and sad because this person had told my husband that they did it. Like, and he didn't know what to do. Like, at the wedding, he didn't know what to do. And, when I stopped, it sort of just resolved itself. And I mean, we've been together, 20 years now, but at the time we'd only been together like a year and a half. And so, and he didn't know my family very well because, we were in Florida.
Right.
And so, he didn't want to start any drama, obviously. And I don't hold that against him at all. Like, he did the best thing that he could do at the time. But when I did find out, and I honestly don't even remember when he told me, but it wasn't too long after, I was just really sad and hurt and
Well,
disappointed.
it's 20 years later, and I can see the hurt
Yeah.
when you talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why do you think you never confronted them?
Um, Probably, like, first of all, I don't think it would have gotten resolved. I think it would have just made things a lot worse. But honestly, um, probably kind of how it would affected my family if I'd done it, more so than the relationship with the person, how it would have affected the rest of my family. I really think the that's the big reason.
It sounds too like they minimized it, like it was kind of a joke to them too. And I
Yeah,
feel like it's hard to have
it's not
any,
funny, but yeah,
yeah, like it's hard to have a conversation with somebody
yeah,
when you're emotionally affected by it, when
yeah.
they're like, whatever, it's no big
Yeah.
deal.
Yeah,
Whatever,
like
get in.
I don't know why they wouldn't have thought it was a big deal, but I'm sure that they would have been like, well, I was just being funny. That was just a joke, right? Like, what? I don't
Yeah.
It's not ever funny to, like, I went to lengths when I was out in my 20s to try to make sure that I didn't get a drink from somebody who I didn't know who it was coming from, and that, I never left mine, even if it was a Coke, unattended,
I was just gonna say, people get arrested for doing this to
Yeah,
people.
and to be at my wedding with like 60 of my closest friends and family, and for this to happen to me, I think I was in shock, even though I wasn't surprised, if that makes sense. Um, and then by the time I sort of just got past the initial shock, like, this is somebody I only see at like family gatherings, so that's never a
Still,
good time,
yeah, still,
Like, yeah, sadly, yeah.
yeah. Do you think that that probably will always prevent you from wanting to have a deeper relationship with them?
Um, I have tried.
Mhm.
And I don't know that that person is emotionally available enough to do that. That's probably the best way to say it. There's a big, big wall all the time around this person, like 24/7.
And do they drink still?
Yeah, more so now
Yeah.
than then. Yeah,
Yeah. So
more
I
so,
imagine
more
that.
so now than then. Yeah,
Yeah, I imagine that puts a wedge too.
yeah.
Yeah.
And some changes have gone on in that person's life to where I'm kind of seeing, like, to the point where I'm a little bit concerned. Like, that's how they cope
Mm.
with it
Mhm.
right now. And so me being like the poster child for not in their mind, right? Um, just wouldn't, like,
They
it
wouldn't come to you anyway.
it wouldn't work. It just wouldn't happen. And I tr- I try not to judge people because I know what it feels like. And I know everybody kind of deals with their own struggles differently, but I'm concerned.
Mhm. Yeah. That's a tough position to be in. Mm.
Yeah. It's especially the position that the role that I have in my family,
Mhm.
like, you know, being the people pleaser and following the rules and that sort of thing, that just, it's all compounds on itself. And yeah, I'm aware of it. I just kind of stuck, what can you do?
What one of the things you mentioned was that you learned a lot through our first conversation about
Mhm.
yourself. And I really, again, I can't say enough how much I admire you putting yourself out there the way you did in the follow-up conversation. Um, Share some of that though, because I do think you're not the only person that I've talked to that's like what I would say like a born non-drinker, like just not interested. And a lot of you are like, oh, I don't have anything to add. And I think you do. But I would love to hear what you learned about yourself, because I know you're not boring.
I just I never, like, after that first conversation, I just thought, wow, this is kind of how the things I would thought I would talk about, but that's just not it. You know what I mean? That's not like why. And so I started thinking about why do I not drink? What influenced me in my life? And do I judge people, even though, I try really hard not to. And just, I feel like I always thought, oh, well, it's just like, I'm just not wired that way. I just don't do it. But there's a lot more to it than that. Like, thinking back about how, um, I just was afraid. Like, I didn't know
Mm.
how I don't, it's the control partly. Like, I don't want to lose control in any situation of my mind and my faculties and all of that. So, that's a big part of it. But I mean, I'm trying to, it's hard I just, when I say I learned a lot, it was just about the things that we kind of talked about. Like, this really does bother me more than I thought it did.
Mhm.
Um, with, and, I hadn't thought about my wedding. I guess the only reason I even started thinking about it was, we just had our anniversary, and then also just never being drunk, and have I ever been close to it or whatever. So it's just it's separated me from everybody else for so long, but I never thought about how that affected me. Like, um I didn't go out and get drunk to deal with my problems, but I was depressed, like super depressed. And I did so many other things trying to figure out what it was that was bothering me at that time in my life. Like, probably when it really started hitting me was probably in my mid-20s, like when I really started feeling just kind of separated so much from other people. And so I would say my self-destructive behavior was getting into relationships where they were not the best, they weren't the safest, and I just didn't care. Like, I put myself, and I might have covered that drink all the time, but I was exposing myself to harm in other ways through like not good relationships with like I wouldn't even say boyfriends because they never even got to that point except for one that I was with for several years. But yeah, just putting myself,
Friends, yeah.
yeah, just in yeah, going out to places and meeting people and thinking those people were safe to hang out with, or like, no, like I'm not going to get emotionally close to this person, but and I'm going to try to be in control of the alcohol. And of course I was, because I didn't drink, but just other things, like just stupid choices. Like, why did I, drive to this place at 4 a.m. when I was like half asleep? I nearly one night, I was coming home to the Linwood area from like east side somewhere, and nearly smashed into a sign on the side of the freeway because I fell asleep.
Oh, geez.
Like, just because I felt like I had to be with some people and just hang out. I didn't, just stupid things, like just, and I never really related that to like, why did I get to that so depressed? Why did I get to that point where I just didn't care about how I treated myself? And I do think that was part of it, because how could it not be part of it when I was isolated since the time I was in high school because of the choices that I made,
It's interesting because I feel like there's this like punishment for either extreme,
Total.
right? Like if you don't drink at all, then you're ostracized. And if you drink too much, you're ostracized. You're either a goody two shoes or the bad guy.
Yeah, or the boring person, or right. Yeah.
You're either boring or
yeah.
you're, oh, dangerous. And it's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And I punished myself because I did not know what to do. I didn't know how to reconcile that. One of the friends that I'd had by the time I was in my 20s, the friends that I'd had in high school that didn't drink, they moved on and did other stuff. And so we all kind of, separated as people do when they get older. And I just didn't, I don't know how to meet people, because everybody meets people out at bars at that age, right? Or at work. And all the people I worked with, one person I worked with had vodka in her water bottle at work, during the day. Like, those were the kind of people that I ended up working with. So, like, what do you do? Where do you go? Where do you meet? This is before social media,
Right.
And so I punished myself by treating myself horribly.
Yeah. I gotta ask, because I see Duran Duran in your background here.
Yeah. They've been with me since I was 10. So, I lost track of them too. That was one of the things. Like, all my music, I would punish myself. And this is another thing I realized, by just not listening to music, shutting it all out, just silence. Yeah. When I was depressed, which is the worst thing that I could have done.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so I lost track of what was going on with my favorite stuff for a long time. And then when my son was born, I just really, he was my most important priority, and I didn't really have a lot of support when we were living in Florida. So now being back here, and I reconnected with some of my friends that I had in high school. Those are the two girls one of the two girls I told you about before. The other one is a new friend. So we go out and, we go to dinner, or we go to Kraken games, and we go to concerts, and whenever we can, we just get together and hang out shopping.
I love this because you said, I am not boring. I like to go to concerts, travel, hike, hockey games. And you just mentioned all of those. Yes.
Yeah. When we can, we all have busy schedules, but yeah, we've been getting together quite a lot recently, so it's been fun. It's
Yeah.
it's a good stress relief too, to go to a concert for me or to go to a hockey game. It just kind of brings me back to who I try to remind myself who I am. I have a lot of different parts of me that make up me, but
Yeah.
that one is the one that gets neglected the most.
Well, and I think too, and maybe you relate to this, so often we relate stress relief to something we do when it's not always an outlet. Sometimes it's an inlet, right? Like sometimes spending time with friends fills you back up and
Yeah,
takes some of that, like there's just not room for that stress because you're just filled back up with love
right.
and joy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like a lot of, I'm not so good with spontaneity. Everybody that knows me will tell you. Schedule, I like to schedule things, but a couple of times she's just, one of my friends has just called me and been like, hey, she lives, on the other side of Seattle, and she lives in Tacoma, and she'll just like, hey, I have to be in Seattle. Do you want to meet me? And, I have to do this or do that. And so we'll just get together and just have dinner and just talk,
Awesome. Yeah.
So we did that the other day. Like, and it's hard because sometimes it creates a little bit of stress because you're like, oh, I'm supposed to be working right now. But it, like you said, it fills you up, and then you can go back to work, right? And focus on what you need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, community is so important, I think, for everybody, for every
Yes,
person.
absolutely.
And I think that, part of a little bit of the loneliness or guilt, maybe shame, right, that we feel like when we're drinking, and I know this is not something you probably experienced, but I think part of it is because those connections become a little bit more superficial when
That
you're
makes
drinking.
sense. Yeah.
Even though you get a lot of it, you get the quantity, you don't get the quality,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Well, I see that too. In when I go out to dinner, like we'll go to business functions or something like that, I'll see that. I mean, I don't experience it myself, but I see what a little bit of it.
Yeah.
That's the
Oh,
industry that we're in.
it's it, I like to go to conferences and stuff, and sometimes the keynote speakers are people that like I've been following for a while, and I think these days like how much more impactful those moments are because I'm going to the VIP parties still, but I'm not drinking. So when I meet that person, I'm so present. I
Mm-hmm.
remember the moment. I don't go, oh my gosh, oh look at how cute this picture is. I don't even remember talking to them.
Oh
Got
wow.
to,
Yeah.
and I love that so much,
That's
in
something
business functions.
that's something I never wanted to lose. The fear of losing that presence of mind anywhere I was. I didn't want to end up in a situation where I didn't know what happened. And that was one of the reasons I never, let anything go that far. But I also didn't put myself around, for the most part, around people like that. I wasn't invited because they all knew, like everybody knew who I was, like in high school and stuff. I was not quiet about who I was.
That
And
takes a different kind of strength
yeah,
to, at that age, especially
I
to
used to
just,
walk around wearing a t-shirt that said drugs suck. So I don't know where I even got it. It was like a stick figure. I just recently saw it in my photo album, but just like I was not quiet about it. So people, didn't, a lot of certain people avoided me.
yeah.
It is,
Honestly, I probably would have
yeah,
at that age because I was exposed at a very young age and it was very normalized. So it was easy for me to go a bit too far, I think, as a teenager. And so I do. I'll own that. I probably would have judged you in high school and thought, ugh, like you said, a goody two shoes, right? Or like she's not gonna want it. I probably in the core would have been like, well, she doesn't want to hang out with me, right?
right.
I'm doing drugs.
I did that with like everybody else, thinking, well, they do this, so they're not going to want to.
Yeah.
And then I did, get that, like, I got questioned a lot. Like I told you before, like, why?
Mhm.
And when we were in our 20s, people were more likely to believe if I said that, I was in recovery than that I just didn't want to drink. And I did not mean anything by that, but I would, after it was pointed out to me that that was really not disrespectful, and I've never did it again, because it's true.
Right.
You know, it's true. People who are struggling every day, that's not me. I don't even think about it. It's not on my radar. I don't like, that's honestly probably why I don't remember the last time I even had a glass of wine, or, I mean, I'm sure it wasn't too far after my son was born, and he's 14. Um,
But it's just not even on the radar.
I can't even, I mean, it's not, I don't like it. So I'm not going to, I'm not going to spend the money on it. And I'm not going to, you know, did get a mocktail a couple months ago with a friend of mine, but the whole time I drank it, I was like, oh, how much sugar is in this thing? It was good, but it's like, uh, you know,
They're almost as expensive as alcohol.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know it was expensive, and it was like, I don't even remember what it was. It had some pineapple or something. I don't know. It was good, but it was like, you know.
I don't know if it was $14.
No. I do drink a lot of coffee though, so I can't judge anybody if they like mocktails, because yeah, I drink a lot of coffee.
I've been sneaking protein powder into my coffee.
Oh,
Doesn't work if you like it black, but if you're adding creamer anyway,
yeah.
a little protein powder, there you go.
Yeah, I actually have some vanilla protein powder.
That's what I use. Yep.
Never thought about it. It's probably
Yeah.
not a good idea, because I'm sure I don't get enough protein.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't drink it black. My mom drinks black. I don't understand.
I've had my phases, but for the most part, I like to sleep it up.
Can't taste. My husband always says, "Oh, she can't taste like coffee if you drink it." Me,
Right.
he knows about me. It can't taste like.
Well, Jen, I really appreciate you coming back and going deeper. Is there anything else that you want to share before I take all of our conversations and make it a beautiful story to share?
This time I'm really thinking about that. Yeah. I don't think so, because I think that's pretty much everything I put. And honestly, it bothered me so much. I could not sleep that night, and I was like, I just did such a disservice, and I didn't want to waste your time. But I really admire what you're doing, and I did hear your story. That was very impactful to me, because it gave me a perspective of why you're doing this. And I didn't mention that one. I was kind of like blanked out when you asked me. But they're all so different, kind of leading to the same place. And I hope that people are listening, because I just feel like when you hear somebody's story, it just makes it kind of, for me, it opens up my mind to, okay, that wasn't my path, but it was someone else's path, and it was a very valid journey how they got from one place to another. And then I'm going to be more empathetic and understanding as to why that person is that way, instead of, I just used to get angry when I was younger, like, but like, people are judging me, and why are they acting this way? Well, I never thought about their why. Like, why are they drinking? What happened? I just assumed they all did it because that's what you do, and that's how you become cool or whatever. And there's so much more to it than that. And I was naive, very, very naive when I was young. I just wasn't exposed to any of it. I'm sure it was happening. Like, I'm sure people had stories around me, and
We didn't talk about this kind of stuff when I would say in the 80s and the 90s.
No.
Like probably the late 90s was when people started talking about this kind of stuff more.
Right.
Before that, it was like, you don't talk about your private life like that.
Right.
You don't talk about problems at home. You keep that behind closed doors. Right. And there's a lot of friends that I've interviewed and I've gotten to know, and I was like, I just had no idea.
Yeah.
Right. Like you were saying, I had no idea what these people were going through and doing.
And I mean, also being older and, having that perspective of looking back on your life when you're 14 or 15 or whatever. I look at my son now, I'm like, buddy, you do not know it all. But like you said, people just didn't share those things back then. And so I'm sure there were people suffering and struggling that I went to school with, that I knew, that I had no idea, because I didn't hang out with them. I didn't see their lives. They didn't talk about it. So my perspective is so shallow and just naive, because I was definitely sheltered a lot, in my life. And I just remember being told, don't do that. That's not good. That's bad. And watch the episode of Growing Pains where Matthew Perry's character gets in the car accident and passes away. And, oh, that's horrible. And, that was kind of my view of why that all happened. And doesn't even scratch the surface of what people go through in their lives.
I remember there was a group of my friends that got in a car accident in high school. And that was the first thing people assumed, was that the driver had been drinking.
Wow.
And actually, he hadn't. And somebody ran a red light and hit him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And there was 4 of them in the car, and 3 of them passed away.
Oh, that's awful.
Yeah. But I remember that was the first thing everybody thought. That was the judgment. It's like, oh, these teenagers out partying, driving around, and it was actually some like 60-year-old dude ran a red light in a big rig and plowed through them.
Wow, that's awful.
Yeah.
And that still happens today. You still see that in the horrible social media. If something like that is reported on a news site, the comments are all like, oh, they were probably doing this or probably doing that. And it's not helpful for anybody.
But I do think your story is helpful for people to hear. And, I really want people who just don't drink, who are non-drinkers, to know, like, hey, you're not boring, and I love, there's been a few of you now, and I do. I find it interesting, and it is so different from my experience. So thank you for sharing. I really appreciate it. And thank you again. I want you to know how much I admire you reaching out and following through on that nagging feeling.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I didn't want to bother you, but from what I've heard, as far as how you've spoken with others, that maybe it would be, you always talk about when you're in your introduction about the gritty stories and the juicy and the impactful, and I didn't feel like any of it was in my first interview. So I felt like I was doing a disservice to you and to me and to anyone who would listen in the future. So I really wanted to dig a little deeper.
Yeah. I'm glad you did. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to sharing more with you as we continue to explore being undrunken together with friends. I hope the Undrunken Podcast is helpful and inspiring to all of you out there. So if you liked this episode, please send it to a friend and help share these stories with more people.